Secretary Stephen Barclay, live from Westminster. Good morning to you, Mr. Barclay.
Good morning.
And we'll first start with the drinks party that the Prime Minister held last night at Downing Street. How jolly an affair was that when she was talking to MPs, when you were talking to MPs? Did you get a sense that any of them had changed their mind over her deal?
Well, what's been clear throughout this process is that the withdrawal agreement is a complex document. The political declaration sets out the future economic relationship with our largest trading partner, the European Union. And we've been discussing, the Prime Minister has had, that other ministers have had with colleagues across all sides of the House, in all parties, listening to those concerns, because voting for this deal is the only way to protect the jobs, to give the certainty that your viewers want for business and for their livelihoods.
It's interesting you say discussions and that the Prime Minister is listening. It's quite clear that the Prime Minister is standing firm. She's not changing her mind on this deal. So what I'm asking you is, after this festive period at the drinks party last night, were there MPs who are against this deal before Christmas now saying that they're going to back it?
Well, some have said that they're much more open to, but it's obviously challenging, and we've been clear that it is a challenging issue. But
when
we're
you
also
say
having
some,
these.
How many? Enough to get the deal through?
Well, I didn't do a head count of the room, but the point is we've been discussing with the European Union. The Prime Minister has been engaging.
Oh, come on, it must have been a bit of a light bulb moment when somebody said they're thinking of backing the deal. You must remember who told you that.
There are some colleagues who have said that, but obviously we've got a challenging vote, and we're having those discussions. We're clear in terms of the commitments that members of Parliament are looking for. We're having those discussions with European leaders. The Prime Minister has been speaking to the German Chancellor, to the Taoiseach, to the Dutch Prime Minister and many others to make that case in those discussions with the European Union, because the backstop is there regardless of which deal is entered into. Any deal, all the deals that people come on the show and talk about, all those deals will require a backstop, and the issue is, how do we work with the European Union to deliver on what they also say they want, is for that backstop to be a temporary measure.
Well, this will be a bit of good news for you this morning. We've just had this in from the Irish Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar. He's saying that he's going to give the UK reassurances over the backstop. He said, we don't want to trap the UK into anything. And we're hearing that Downing Street are pushing for an exchange of letters with EU members about a trade deal for 2021 so that the UK won't need to use this backstop. We would just be out of the transition period. Are you pushing for these letters? What are the kind of reassurances the Prime Minister wants?
Well, what your question shows is the reality is that there are safeguards against entering into the backstop. Neither side wants to go into the backstop. We want to have a new trading relationship with the European Union. But if we do enter,
if we do enter into the backstop, MPs want reassurances. Leo Varadkar's words there are very promising, but they're not legally binding. What does the Prime Minister need as reassurances to convince MPs who don't like the idea of a backstop?
Well, as I was just saying, that there are safeguards in the text in terms of the best endeavours avoiding going into the backstop. But members of Parliament have said that they're looking for further assurance on that point. And actually, those assurances are in line with things that the European Union themselves have said, both in terms of their commitment to have a new agreement in place and to use best endeavours to deliver on that quickly. But also, it's European law to say under Article 50 that the arrangements must be temporary. We can't enter into a permanent arrangement in the form of the backstop. So
well,
this
it remains
is a
to be
position
seen
of both
what
sides.
reassurances the Prime Minister gets and whether they will convince MPs that don't like her deal. There is an amendment being tabled today by senior MPs, the likes of Yvette Cooper and Nicky Morgan, that want to shut down some of the government's work in the event of a no-deal Brexit. And they're threatening this amendment unless you rule out a no-deal. What are you going to do about that? Because we're being told these financial measures, the ability to raise taxes in the event of a no-deal, to fund any measures created by a no-deal Brexit, you know, they would be catastrophic. What are you going to do about this amendment today?
Well, I don't accept that it would be catastrophic and shut down government and the sort of phraseology that you're using. But the reality is it's contradictory for members of Parliament, many of whom are in clear majority in Parliament, voted both to give the people their say on the European referendum, to honour that result. A majority in Parliament voted to trigger Article 50. And once you've triggered Article 50, there are two options. You either have a deal, and the European Union have been clear that the Prime Minister's deal is the only deal that's available after 2 years of negotiation.
Let's get back to this amendment today. Are you going to accept it to avoid defeat next week? Is this what's going to happen?
You asked the question. There's two options. You either have the deal on the table with the European Union, or you have no deal. And it's illogical for members of Parliament, many of whom have voted to trigger Article 50, to then say both that they're going to vote against the only deal on the table from the European Union that the Prime Minister has negotiated, but to also say that they're against no deal. Those are the two options that flow from triggering Article 50.
OK, let's talk about another couple of options. I'm looking at the front page of the Daily Telegraph today. UK puts out feelers to pause Article 50. Is that an option? Have you put out the feelers? Are you going to extend Article 50?
The government's the government policy is clear on this. The Prime Minister has said it on many an occasion, is we are leaving the European Union on the 29th of
That's
March.
A guarantee,
we're not looking,
is it?
Well, we're not looking to extend. And I think the point is, what your question highlights is, again, one of the inconsistencies that comes from a number of MPs when they talk about extending Article 50. The point is that is not a unilateral decision for the UK government. It would require the consent of every one of the 27 member states. And there'd also be practical problems. There'd also be practical problems in doing so, because the European parliamentary elections are at the end of May. And so if you wanted to extend, which isn't our policy, but if someone did want to do that, then you'd run into those parliamentary elections at the end of May. But it's not a unilateral decision for the UK government.
Next week's vote, is that definitely going ahead? Is that a guarantee? It's been paused before. Could it be paused again? We've only got a week until it happens.
Yes, it is going ahead. The Prime Minister's been very clear about that.
OK, fine. Just want to ask you about something we're talking about today, and the abuse of MPs over Brexit. Let's have a look at what happened to the Conservative MP and Remainer Anna Soubry outside Westminster yesterday. Just take a look at this.
You lost the people's vote. Anna, you're a fascist. Anna, fascist. Anna Soubry, you're a fascist.
Can you just show that there are children?
You're a fascist.
Anna, why are you calling us EDL without any proof? We're not EDL, Anna.
Two police.
Anna, you're full lies. Yes, Anna.
And now in the background there, you can see police officers on Abingdon Green where Anna Soubry were, and some were walking alongside her, but they weren't intervening. Is the police approach to the abuse of MPs adequate enough, in your opinion?
Well, I'm sure the police will be reviewing that. I mean, how the police operationally behave is an issue for the police, but it is an issue also that the Speaker takes a very close interest in, as do the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister. So people will be looking at that. Clearly, that sort of behaviour is wrong, and I condemn it.
I'm just looking at these images now of Anna Soubry surrounded by a group of men following her down the street, very close to her, shouting abuse in her face. Does that look safe to you?
No, it's clearly wrong. It's inappropriate, and I condemn it completely. And it's beholden on all of us. After what has been a very divisive period in her life, it's for members of Parliament to show leadership in the language we use. It's for members of the public to respect the democratic process, and it's for the police operationally to look at whether the law has been broken and to take action where appropriate. And I condemn completely that action. It is important. I mean, I was in the chamber when those incidents happened, answering a urgent question. I look up from the dispatch box at the plaque of Joe Cox. I'm very mindful also of the custodial sentences that were recently issued in terms of the death threats against another Member of Parliament, Rosie Cooper. And it's extremely important that after what has been a very divisive period, that we bring the country back together. That is personally why I support a deal, because I think we need to move on. But in terms of the incident yesterday with Anna Soubry, completely unacceptable, and it's right that people are looking into that.
OK, Stephen Barclay, Brexit Secretary, thank you very much for your time here on Sunrise this morning.